There's a carpet in our living room that I've been looking at for many years, and suddenly one day it dawned on me that would make a great cutting board. So I took a picture of it, headed back to the shop, started sketching out what the design would look like, and made a materials list. With a basic plan in place, I grabbed some walnut and maple off the shelf and fired up the planer. Once everything was planed down to the right thickness, I moved over to the miter saw and cut everything down to rough length. The walnut's actually too wide for my miter saw, so I pulled out the old circular saw and cut it by hand. After a few passes through the joiner to square up an edge, it's onto the table saw to rip everything to width. I only needed the walnut to be about 6 inches long, so I went back to the miter saw and cut everything down for the first glue up. I needed some thinner strips to make the stripes in the corner pattern, so I resaw those at the bandsaw, then take them over to the sander for the final thickness. With all my parts sanded down to the final thickness, I head over to the workbench for the first glue up. Now you can start to see the main pattern coming together on the body of this one. With all the clamps tight, we'll let this sit overnight, and then we'll smooth everything out in the morning with the sander. The next day I pulled off the clamps, scraped off the excess glue, and went over to the drum sander to smooth everything out. Once all the parts are cross-cut to their final thickness, I took a few pieces over to the bandsaw to resaw them into thinner strips that'll form our corner pattern. Time for the final glue up. This one's actually going to be too big for my panel clamps, so it's onto the cabinet clamps. I'm not even going to use cowls on this one. I think everything's nice and flat, and it's going to stay that way. I'm just going to make sure I put clamps on in 2 different directions and get everything tight. This is going to be fun to try to get all of this lined up. With all the clamps tight, I'll let this sit for an hour or so, then I'll come back and scrape the glue off while it's still pretty pliable. Then we'll let this sit overnight. Once everything was relatively flat off the sander, I went to the table saw, squared up 2 edges, and then made sure my border was even all the way around. Once I had my final dimensions, I went back to the drum sander. I've been using this thing mostly as somewhat of a light planer with 80 grit. Decided this time I was going to try to run up through the grits and see if I could cut down on the hand sanding a little bit. So I did 80, 120, and 180 before heading over to the orbital sander. Running up through the grits on the drum sander really did help. I didn't have near as many lines to get out with the hand sander. I did start at 80 grit like I normally did just to get the last few lines off, but I didn't have to spend near as much time on this as I normally would. After I sanded everything up to 180, it was over to the router table to round over the edges and cut in my handles. After a couple more rounds of water popping, power sanding, and hand sanding, it was time for a mineral oil bath. Leave this in the drying rack for a couple days to soak up the oil. Wipe on a couple good heavy coats of board butter, buff that out, and it's ready for the kitchen. All right, that's gonna wrap up another one. I think everything turned out exactly as I was planning with this matching the carpet. And with the open space in the middle, I think this will be a good blend between pattern board and usable cutting board. I know a lot of people don't want to cut on a fancy pattern cutting board because they think it'll ruin it. So with the big open space in the middle here, you have plenty of room to work. If you want to pick one of these up for yourself, or if you just want to set a plan so you can build one, head on over to the website. I'll leave a link down in the description. If you want to see more cutting board videos, click on this link up here. That's going to do it for this time. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.